Mental hospital employees of Reddit, who's the scariest patient you've ever had to deal with? In the 90s, I worked overnight and weekend security at a center for psychiatry that cared for inpatients, outpatients, and even criminally insane awaiting trial. That area of the building was basically a prison. Police would often bring in the arrested for evaluation, and the homeless could even walk in and ask for help. We saw all kinds. I did this job for years, and some nights got very, very busy. Two scary situations really stick out from those times. The first, I was manning the front desk, and a walk-in patient holding a knife walks in screaming, "I want to kill myself." He had cut himself all over his body and was covered in blood. My supervisor quickly rifled through the database and found him. History of violence against staff, AIDS, hepatitis, and more. I was commanded to put him down. I approached him with a chair as a shield. When he wound up to swing the knife at me, I rammed him with the chair until he went down. Then a bunch of staff jumped in, and everybody put one foot on him until he was better subdued and eventually sedated. A doctor was in my face right afterwards yelling, "Did he touch you? Did he cut you?" I wasn't sure until after an examination. The second incident started when two police bring in a tough-looking guy for assessment. This guy is keeping his head down, not saying anything. I lead them to a secure observation room. The arrested and one officer goes in. The other cop returns with me to get our information and to see if he's in our database. Suddenly, my partner, who was watching the monitors, jumps up, hits the alarm, and runs back the way we came. We run after. The door is opened, and we see the guy wailing on the officer with his handcuffs like a one-handed flail. The other cop does most of the work in this case, and the arrested is pretty much laid out on the floor. How did this happen? How the fuck did this happen? In my quick inspection, I noticed that his hands are funny. They're all covered in blood from the fight, but something isn't right. I look closer. This guy doesn't have a thumb. Even the ball socket that attaches the thumb to the palm has been removed. The cop looks at the other hand. Holy shit! Both thumbs removed. They cuffed this guy and didn't notice he was missing both thumbs. The cuffs would just slide off. I still think about that guy. How? Why? For what reason? What crazy world was he a part of where something like that could happen? I still wonder. Not inpatient, but an outpatient case manager here. I've worked with a lot of people who have pretty significant histories of drug abuse, violence, erratic behavior, and a few people with murder convictions. For the most part, none of them fazed me too much. I've got all kinds of stories about the stuff that's happened with them, but I've only really had one client I had ever been afraid of. When he was new to the agency, so I did his intake. Homeless guy, early 60s, diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was currently living on the streets and was open that he had serious issues with drugs. He talked about his violent outbursts. He would get angry and paranoid and cut up other homeless guys he thought were out to harm him. While talking, I then learned that he had been incarcerated previously for murdering his wife with a shotgun. He did so, in his account, because he was depressed and the voices told him to kill her. Again, none of this typically was out of the ordinary for me, but what scared me was his attitude. He described the murder, without any prompting, in a graphic but almost literate way, during which he smiled blissfully, then finishing saying that after the murder was completed, he felt relieved, like a great heavy cloud lifted from my head. He was insightful about his symptoms, but didn't seem to care. Again, this was not the first person with a murder rap, nor the first with schizophrenia that I had ever worked with, but he scared the shit out of me. It was an animal instinct, if anything. After that, he was assigned to me, and I never really saw him again. Last I heard, he had left for his hometown, but I still see him around occasionally, or at least I think I do. Notes. No, I don't know exactly how he got released after incarceration, but it was parole. The vast majority of people with schizophrenia are not dangerous or violent, and some of my most productive case management relationships were with people who had schizophrenia. I have a feeling that this guy had something else going on. I made a 2-month internship at a very famous forensic hospital in Germany prior to my studies. Many patients there were in what we call Sicherheitsverwahrung in Germany. Basically, that means when a patient is too dangerous to be ever released, he stays in the prison or hospital after his sentence time. The hospital I worked in was separated in 2 sectors. The first was for acute psychotic patients. There you had the screaming, schizophrenic, and acute dangerous people. For example, when you got stuck on an acid trip and killed someone, you came there. Some of the patients there were relocated relatively fast to normal psychiatric hospitals. The second one was mostly for patients who were already locked in for several years. They appeared not as obviously insane like the others, mostly because their medication was adjusted really well during the time. That's the place I worked in. We had a lot of pedos there, but they were more pitiable, to be honest, and not really dangerous or creepy. They got medication which suppresses their libido. As a side effect, they were really sluggish and appeared kind of dumb. But there was one patient who really terrified me. In contrast to most of the others, he was really intelligent, cultivated, attractive, and extremely charming. He was some kind of accountant before he got in the psychiatric hospital. Apparently, he had a competitor at work, which he killed, skinned partially of, and placed the corpse in the office to show the others what happens when you get in his way. After 10 years in the forensic psychiatry, he tortured his roommate to death at night over some minor argument. This dude really terrified me. I never met such a cold, manipulative character like him. He had this special, super creepy look on his face when he was alone with you, like he knew all your secrets and weaknesses. There was another really uneasy situation when I nearly shat my pants. Of course, it was during the night shift. Of course, our office was separated from the part of the building where the patients lived, and the only way out of the patient's area was through our office, which was highly secured with automatic locks, cameras, etc. 2 of my colleagues made their round to look after the patients. I stayed in the office and watched the surveillance cameras. Suddenly, I got an unsettling feeling. I looked out of the window, and in the reflection, I saw a woman hiding behind the door, watching me smiling. I instantly jumped out of my chair and pressed the alarm button on my pager, even though the woman was one of the chilled patients. After we brought her back in her room, we tried to reconstruct how she might have got in there, but on the cameras we saw nothing that could have explained that. Unfortunately, it was during my last days there, so I didn't find out what happened there in the end. Edit. Translation mistake. Thanks for pointing that out. Hope I'm not too late to the party. I've worked in mental health for 10+ years, mostly with children, but with adults as well. On the adult unit, we had a young, 21 or so patient who presented as extremely mentally sound. His speech was clear and his hygiene was really intentional, and his answers to every question were appropriate. He was admitted around lunchtime. He ate his meal and then went into his room to take a nap. About 10 minutes later, he bursts out of his room stark naked and walks out and through the unit like a robot. He goes to the wall and pushes his front side of his naked body into the built-in, coiled-up fire hose and yelled, "I have to recharge." I once worked with a pediatric patient who had set her house on fire by dousing her younger sister with gasoline and lighting her sister on fire. I don't know what ended up happening to younger sister. She was in the ICU when the older sister was on the pediatric psych unit. Her affect was completely flat the entire time, yet she told jokes and talked constantly. She sang Taylor Swift's "We Are Never, Ever, Ever Getting Back Together" in the flattest tone I've ever heard over and over and over. When I worked at a lockdown state facility for children, I worked with an 8-year-old who had shot and killed his younger sister. He was in our facility for over a year. Unlike every other child there, he never had any huge problems, no aggression, he followed the rules, etc. He was a very sweet and compliant kid, but he also never showed any empathy for killing his sister, neither in therapy or around cottage staff. He just maintained that he didn't mean to kill her, just wanted to see what would happen, but he only talked about it a couple of times. Over a year later, the state wouldn't pay for him to stay in such a secure placement, so he went to a treatment home, and it was one of our nurses' homes. He said a couple of weeks after the kid moved in, another of his kids that lived with him complained that the new kid kept coming into his room at night and threatening him with knives. This kid lied a lot, but the nurse paid attention to what he was saying and tried to catch him. He didn't catch him, but the kid said it was still happening. My nurse friend installed a camera, and sure enough, the sweet and compliant kid was creeping into his room at night with a knife he stole from a kid at school. He went back into a lockdown facility after that, worked with a kid that killed 1-week-old puppies by throwing them off his 3rd-story apartment building. He told me about it and said he threw them one by one so that he could hear each one crunch. The same kid killed a litter of kittens by ripping their paw pads off and letting them bleed out. According to his parents, they found him in the garage with the dead kittens and with blood wiped all over his skin. I'm currently living in New Jersey, relocated from the Midwest, and for the life of me, I cannot find a job working with mentally ill children because of a possession charge from 2012. My passion is mental illness, and my specialty is pediatric psychiatry, but because of a stupid conviction, I can't do what I want to do. I have a wonderful job with lots of room for advancement, ironically enough, in a specialty pharmacy, but I still wish I could work in mental health. I was a patient in a mental hospital once. The vast majority of mental patients are not scary, and it's easy to forget that and stigmatize mental illness. The scariest person I saw in there was a man who was upset because he didn't understand his medication. I stayed on the other side of the common room until he snapped and started yelling at an orderly, and even then, he wasn't violent. He got a Thorazine injection in his ass cheek, and he was fine the next day. Second scariest was a racist nurse who berated this toothless Polish dude for not speaking English well. I avoided her too. One guy would hide his pills under his tongue so the nurse thought he swallowed and then stash them in his room and snort them to get high. He was fun to shoot the shit with. There was a really smart dude, a teacher. We talked for hours about spirituality and education. All the guys in for suicide attempts were super chill. I met a H addict who gave me weightlifting tips. Hope he got clean. He was there because he got caught after an intentional OD and Narcaned back to life. Actually, I just thought of a scarier patient. Great guy, lots of fun. Completely psychotic, could barely answer simple questions. He just paced around with a goofy smile on his face, talking to himself. My favorite was when he'd jump on a table and pretend he was on stage. He'd hold an imaginary mic and rap until the orderlies got him down. He was a straight A student until he took a bad batch of drugs and fucked his brain. He'd been at the facility for 18 months. What makes his story the most unsettling was the one lucid moment he had while I was there. He stopped pacing, went silent, then mumbled, "I'm stupid," and louder, "I'm stupid," and shouting, "Slit my throat, kill me, I'm stupid." That was fucking scary in an existential way because 5 minutes later, he was back to a goofy grin and pretending to be a rapper. Edit. Thank you for the gold, kind stranger. I worked at a school for emotionally disturbed children while attending college. The school housed adolescent girls and boys who had been removed from their horrific families. Each dorm had 2 child care workers per shift and housed up to 12 kids. At different times, I worked on both girls' and boys' dorms. I'm female. The boys were usually straightforward. If they wanted to hurt you, they just hauled off and punched you. The girls. Oh my God, the girls. Sneaky as fuck. On one of the girls' dorms, it was me and another woman. One of the girls hated this other woman. The girl would crawl into the top of her closet and lie on the shelf, waiting for this woman to come looking for her. She would then jump out of the closet on top of the woman and start hitting her. We took the kids to laundromats so they could do their laundry. These trips usually went pretty well, but one time, a 14-year-old girl who was about 5 feet even and probably weighed 90 pounds decided she wanted to act out. She started throwing laundry detergent, getting in weaker girls' faces and threatening them, etc. My coworker and I had to restrain her to keep her from hurting the other girls. Now, restraining a child, something we had been trained to do, was never fun, but doing it in public as a special kind of hell. The goal is to take the child to the ground and hold their arms behind their backs until they calm down. So my coworker gets this surprisingly strong girl who she has 6 inches and 40 pounds on the ground, and I'm helping her get the girl's arms behind her back. Note: you cannot actually hurt the child, so you have to be careful. Somehow, my coworker let her arm stray too close to the girl's mouth, and the girl just sunk her teeth in my coworker's arm and held on for dear life. Blood was running from the wound. Now I'm trying to get the girl to stop biting. At this precise moment, 2 bystanders decide we are hurting this poor girl. They start screaming at us to let her go. They are going to call the police, blah, blah, blah. As calmly as I could, I explained the situation, pointed out that the girl had my coworker's arm in her mouth, and said if they didn't back off, the police would be visiting them for interfering with us doing our jobs. Once I mentioned the name of the facility, they backed off. We got the girl under control, I called for help from the facility, and we got the girl back to the dorm. My coworker went to the ER for the bite. Another time, a substitute childcare worker thought it was a good idea to bring a butcher knife onto the dorm so she could cut a watermelon with it. I did not know she had done this until it was too late. One of the girls decided it was time to act out, and she took the knife and was threatening other girls with it. This is where I walked in. I had been checking on another child at the time. I arrived just in time to see the substitute childcare worker tell the girl to give her the knife, holding out her hand in expectation. The girl basically sliced across the palm of the woman's hand and then ran outside with the knife, where she proceeded to stab the moonwalk, bouncy house, to death. I called the supervisor and then followed the girl outside to try and monitor her. After she stabbed the moonwalk to death, she broke her one of our plastic windows and started smashing her wrist against the jagged edges trying to cut herself. She still had the knife, but I don't think she really wanted to hurt herself. More staff arrived, we convinced her to drop the knife, and we restrained her and put her in the quiet room, which was a padded room with a door that had a window in it for observation. When a kid was in the quiet room, they had to be monitored every 15 minutes. Speaking of quiet rooms, my now husband worked on the boys' dorm. One of the kids acted out badly enough, danger to self or others, that my husband had to put him in the quiet room. The kid was small and didn't fight, so it seemed like an easy to my husband. He walked the kid into the room and then started backing out to close the door. Except the kid had hidden a cup full of pee behind the door, and he grabbed the cup of pee and flung it at my husband, catching him full in the face. Fun times. I actually met my husband at this job. He and I were working a 3-11 shift when the kids in all 6 dorms decided to riot. So 78 kids and about 15 staff. They were breaking windows, fighting each other, and fighting staff. You name it, and they were fucking it up. In the middle of all this, one girl on my dorm claimed to have imbibed her nail polish. I notified the nurse, and the girl maintained she drank the nail polish until the nurse told her she had to administer ipecac. For those of you who don't know, ipecac is a syrup that makes you vomit. It tastes pretty bad. The girl admitted she didn't drink the nail polish and showed us where she poured it out. She just smeared a little on her mouth. Honestly, I thought the nurse was going to make her drink the ipecac anyway. The riot started about 10 p.m., and the 11-7 shift, 1 person per dorm, showed up at 11 p.m. It took both shifts to get the kids settled down. The 3-11 shift finally got to go home about 1 a.m. As we were getting ready to leave, I turned to my now husband, a man I'd seen a few times before but did not know well, although he was friends with my roommate. Me. I'm going home to get drunk. Wanna come? Him. Yes. We've been married for 35 years this May and together for 40. Our children were reasonably well behaved. We never had to put them in the quiet room even once.